So it's December of 1941. The Japanese have launched a sneak attack on Pearl Harbor, bringing the United States into the war against them. And Germany, amazingly, foolishly, declares war on the United States, and we declare war on Germany. Um, Very quickly, we agree with the British that we have to have a Europe first strategy. As dangerous as the Japanese are, Germany is a far more formidable threat. Also, in Asia, we don't have any real allies except Australia and British India that are going to be capable of holding out. In Europe, if we don't defeat the Germans, they could actually eventually invade Britain or conquer the Russians. So, Europe first. None of that would have happened if Hitler had stayed out of the war, but he didn't. And that's, again, a blessing to the world. You don't want Hitler to win World War II. However, Yamamoto was right. For the next 6 months, Japan has its way. The Kitabutai, the Japanese carrier striking force, after hitting Hawaii, takes part in attacking the American Philippines. Our forces pull into Corregidor and the Bataan Peninsula, but there's going to be no Plan Orange because there's no American battle fleet except for a couple of aircraft carriers to fight its way through to the Philippines. But we hold out. General Douglas MacArthur leads the Filipino army and the American army in the Philippines, and we fight month after bloody month, holding off the superior force of Japanese. The Filipino fighters, who are some of our best, begin calling themselves the battling bastards of Bataan. No mama, no papa, no Uncle Sam. In other words, the fact that the U.S. isn't coming to help them is something that they're just using black humor about because they have no notion of how else to handle it. They're not going to surrender. They're going to keep fighting. But darn it, they're going to make fun of the old Plan Orange, the battling bastards of Bataan. Unfortunately, even battling bastards need food to fight. And the writing was on the wall. Sooner or later, they were going to have to surrender. President Roosevelt does not want General MacArthur to surrender. General MacArthur is a national figure. He was the most decorated American officer in World War I, national hero to a lot of people. So Roosevelt orders MacArthur home, or out of the Philippines, which is doomed. MacArthur refuses. Roosevelt says, "This is a presidential order. You will not do anything other than leave the Philippines." Everyone expects MacArthur to get on a submarine. MacArthur doesn't. MacArthur gets on a PT boat, which is basically a plywood motorboat with no armor and a bunch of torpedoes, completely vulnerable to air attack and sea attack. And he and his wife and his son take a PT boat through the Philippines until they can reach an American submarine base in the southern Philippines that then takes them on to Australia. That was a gutsy thing to do. When he is en route, General Wainwright, his replacement in the Philippines, surrenders. The Japanese have a feeling about war. They expect warriors to give their life to their country. Their soldiers are dead to the world. The emperor has taken their lives. If the emperor chooses to give them back at the end of their term of service, great. But basically, Japanese soldiers are like the walking dead. To them, surrender is unthinkable. And the Americans surrender with lots of troops that need food. The Japanese don't have the food. And what are the Japanese going to do? Well, first of all, Japanese soldiers are brutalized at this time. To go through Japanese basic training makes American basic training seem like nothing but a bunch of Boy Scouts with harsh language. The Japanese, all of them, are physically beaten to within an inch of their lives, the soldiers, by their own NCOs, by their own sergeants. They have this anger that's been trained into them, that's going to come out in explosive brutality. And now they're dealing with thousands of soft Westerners who just surrendered. The Japanese engage in the Bataan Death March. The survivors of Bataan are marched hundreds of miles to the north non-stop for days. Anyone who slows down gets bayoneted. Anyone who stops gets bayoneted. Anyone who falls down gets shot or bayoneted. Hundreds of Americans and Filipinos are murdered after surrender during the Bataan Death March. It's one of Japan's many war crimes. Japan is awful to prisoners of war, civilians as well as soldiers, because they believe that the worst thing a person can do is surrender. So the Philippines are now in Japanese hands. But there's another great Western base that the British have been building up for decades, Singapore at Malacca Strait. This is the gateway to the South China Sea. It is the gateway to Asia. It's the major British base east of Suez. British leaders, including Churchill, has said that Singapore is a rock, a fortress. Fortress Singapore will never fall. The Japanese have a plan to deal with Singapore. I think it's General Yamashita lands a series of troops on the coast of British Malaya. These troops are equipped with bicycles. The Japanese bicycle soldiers bike their way towards the landward side of Singapore. When the British try stopping them on the roads, the Japanese go around. Why am I doing this the wrong way? Go around the British and attack them from both sides, front and rear. The British stick to the roads. The Japanese are perfectly comfortable winding their way through the jungles. Even though the British have numbers on their side, first of all, these are the soldiers that weren't deemed combat ready for Europe or North Africa. The British are a country at war. These are, in some ways, not the best soldiers that the British ever had. But they're afraid of the jungle, or so it seems. Their commander is afraid of deploying them through jungle. So the Japanese bicycle soldiers arrive north of Singapore from the landward side. North of Singapore. Singapore is designed as a fortress to protect against a sea attack. It's like the guns at Aqaba we talked about with Lawrence of Arabia. All of Britain's defenses are aimed out to sea. They have no serious defenses on the land side, and the guns can't turn around 360 degrees. The Japanese get within range of the freshwater facilities, the facilities that provide the city and the fortress of Singapore with water, and they start damaging them, and British General Percival surrenders. He surrenders about 500,000 troops, 500,000 men or so, to an army of about 50,000 men, a tenth of its size. The Japanese, again, are enraged by this. They are absolutely disgusted that the British, with so many men, would surrender. Now, Percival had a good reason to surrender. If the Japanese could destroy the fresh water making facilities of Singapore, you can't fight if you can't drink water from time to time, certainly not in the steaming tropics. But the Japanese commit dozens of Bataan Death March type atrocities against the British prisoners, civilian as well as military. If you want to see the way Japanese treated civilian prisoners, in China, the Japanese took Hong Kong and the foreign legations in Shanghai. There's a movie made in the 80s called Empire of the Sun that does a very good job of showing a British teenager who's caught up in all of this and is captured by the Japanese and learns to survive. But you see some of the real hardcore cruelty that the Japanese are capable of there. So, the Japanese continue their advances. They send their carrier force deep into the Indian Ocean, and they raid Ceylon, which is Sri Lanka, the island south of India, and they threaten Madagascar. And then they bring their forces back. They bomb Darwin in Australia, and the Japanese are getting ready. The Japanese have invaded not just the American Philippines, but the entire Dutch East Indies to get the oil. Every force that stands against them, whether it's American, British, Australian, or Dutch, gets destroyed. It seems like nothing can stop the Japanese. So the Japanese are expanding their operations during this 6 months, and it seems like nothing can stop them.